Welcome to the Governance and Policy Committee meeting of the Durham District School Board. I would like to be able to call this meeting to order. I'd first like to be able to start with our land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is upon these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to ask to understand if there's any declarations of interest in tonight's agenda. Not seeing any. We do have the agenda that was sent out. Are there any additions to the agenda as distributed? Not seeing any either. If I could have a motion to be able to approve the agenda. Trustee Templeton, seconded by Trustee Edwards. Any objections to the agenda, the motion to approve the agenda as distributed? Not seeing any either, so we'll consider that the agenda is approved. We have the draft minutes of the Governance and Policy meeting of March the 3rd, 2022 before us, found on pages 1 and 2. Are there any errors or omissions that people would, or corrections that people would like to be able to bring forward before we seek a motion to approve the minutes? Not seeing any indication. If I could get someone to be able to move approval of the Governance and Policy Committee meeting minutes of March the 3rd, I appreciate that. Trustee Morton, could I have a seconder? Trustee Forbes, any opposed to that motion? Seeing none, we'll consider that approved. We have before us tonight, trustees, and our work tonight consists of being able to review 2 draft policies. Our objective tonight is to be able to review the changes that have been made in these policies, with the potential of being able to recommend that they go forward to the next board meeting for a notice and then for approval to the next board meeting. So we do have the policies here. I was going to ask, depending upon on staff, if they wanted to be able to work through the actual. I might suggest that we work through the marked copy, because that would, I think, be a better indication of those changes that have been made. If that's okay. Not sure if we want staff member to work through that, and then we kind of work through the changes, if that would be a satisfactory process. I see. Okay, Director Marsh.
Thanks, Chair Barrett. So completely in your hands in terms of how you would like to proceed. We anticipated you would do similar to the last meeting, where we would go through section by section under your leadership. So happy to do that for both policies, if that's how you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, I think I like, from a process standpoint, I'd like to work through the marked copies. These are probably less, I don't want to say less complex, that might be an understatement. But I think that some of the changes that have been made are certainly within the framework and boundarized. I think it would be better if we work through the marked copy to be able to go through that, because I think it lends itself to a clear indication of the changes that are being proposed. And then we'll look at that we can make potential recommendations for change as we go through section by section. So if we could. So I'm not sure who you'd like Director Marsh to be able to help. I knew that was probably the case, Patrick, but I didn't want to make any assumptions either. I'm assuming that's correct, Director Marsh, that Patrick will lead us through this?
It can either be Patrick, or we can sort of take turns with it, with Heather doing a little bit as well. So
I am this
Council
one.
Potter or or Superintendent Mundy. Do you want to start with Superintendent Mundy and we'll go from there? Does that make sense?
I'm certainly in your hands on this one. So we can certainly start with Superintendent Mundy. And we are, just to make sure, we're starting at the top of page 12. Right?
Well, I can just jump into Heather as we go along, if that's okay, Chair Barrett.
I would be more than happy with that, Council Cotter.
Yes, it's been a collaborative effort. So you can see in page 12, the first section goes through the overall objectives of the policy in terms of aligning with the human rights policy as well, and supporting the previous workplace harassment policy. I don't know if there's any questions from section 1.
Yeah, I'd say there's really no substantive change there. It's just sort of, as Heather says, aligning some of the language with our human rights policy and just reworking a little bit, but certainly consistent with what was there already.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on the changes in section 1, trustees? I'm not seeing any. Superintendent Mundy, so you can certainly go forward. Thank you.
Okay, the second section has specific definitions to support the policy. One of the changes here was really around the disrespectful conduct and clarifying that for this policy. And then obviously the harassment and reprisal, and those were similar to the previous policy.
Yeah, because there's been no changes made to that, correct?
Yeah, no changes since the original one draft that you saw.
Yeah. This being this kind of the second draft, so
yeah, I would say no substantive change to harassment or sexual harassment definition.
Right.
Although we did sort of, I say, add a little more detail, I think, to sexual harassment definition, but it's no substantive difference really. Yeah,
but to Heather's point, no changes from the last draft that we examined. I know it was a while ago, but there's no further change. So,
well, this just to be clear though, this is a track change off the existing policy. So we're not really tracking what was before you on November 9th, but I think that's correct, Chair Barrett.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that what we're clear on is that that the language in black is language that exists, and any of the changes are certainly tracked, correct? In red. So red is deletion from deletion. This is a track change against the existing policy. So red is a deletion, or sometimes you'll see an underlying change. Black is additional language. That is, black underlined is additional new language. Okay, perfect. Okay, that so most of it's actually been replaced, although it's in some cases the substance is exactly the same. It's just sort of been moved and reworked. Right. Okay. I appreciate that clarification. Trustee Edwards.
Yes, and I think it was mentioned a little bit before of asking what the definition of gossiping was, and I do know what it means, but I'm looking at kind of equating to things where people used to say, "Oh, go tattletale," and sort of thing, and because there is a difference between talking about a particular situation that happened or relating that than it is then actually gossiping about adding additional opinions and facts to something. So and I'm just a little concerned about gossiping and the range of what is considered. Because we might have some cases that may come forward, or complaints that came forward that is really not gossiping, but is talking about a situation that happened with no opinionated context or whatever. So I'm just curious about gossiping and the definition there, and maybe elaborating it a bit.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Certainly, when we're looking at it, I think the key words in that is gossiping and spreading rumors, right? So realizing that it's really connected to that in terms of, you know, negative talk that is not substantive in terms of fact, that is creating a negative workplace for an individual.
I could just jump in, Chair Barrett, as well. I think the key is these are examples of potentially disrespectful conduct. Really, the definition is any conduct that a reasonable person would consider inappropriate and disrespectful of another person. So that's everything's going to come back to that. And there obviously has to be a judgment by the investigator who's reviewing a complaint. That really is the key. Is the conduct inappropriate and disrespectful of another person? And that these are some conduct that could engage that test.
No, thank you.
Dr. Marsh?
Yeah, just to add, while it was an example, the point's well taken in terms of the potential misunderstanding related to it. And so we'll highlight that one because I think the key there is spreading rumors and the negative talk that Superintendent Mundy referenced. So we'll highlight that one, Trustee Edwards.
Okay, thank you, Director Marsh. Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. So I really appreciate some of the paring down of the language, and I do think that, you know, maybe could include but not limited to might alleviate some of the, like, it's not just the items on the bulleted list that could qualify for disrespectful conduct might be helpful. But keeping it, I just think that our policies, I just, as simple and pared down while being usable, it's a tricky balance, I get, but I think keeping the language is simple, so it's really implementable is top of mind. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. Trustee Crawford.
Yeah, I was concerned about not just misunderstanding, but misuse. Are we going to have some clarification as to what takes place if someone is thinking that this is going on? Where do they go with it first? We don't want people running off to expensive investigations on these things. Do they take it up with the immediate supervisor? Does the person get a warning? I'm thinking even in bullying, for instance, it has to happen twice before we take action. So I'm concerned about the wording, but I'm also concerned about the use of it.
So sorry.
I'm going to take this one. So later on in the policy, Paul, it talks about how a complaint is initiated. It also talks about what the process is. So I think the questions you have are included within the balance of the policy. And as we go through each section, I think we'll have an opportunity to be able to examine, you know, the steps, etc., with regards to the very question you're asking.
That would be good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right. So noted, Donna, your question and response by the director. Heather, we can certainly move forward to, I guess we're at section 3, I'm assuming, but it's a fairly short one at this point. So.
Correct. Yes. Section 3 is just clarifying the scope, which obviously is all workers in the workplace. So right. I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Not seeing any Superintendent Mundy. So.
Thank you. So we'll move into section 4, which speaks to roles and responsibilities. So it outlines, you know, specifically for, you know, the director in terms of ensuring that the policy is posted, is shared, and updated, and then the responsibilities of workers, because all employees obviously would fall under the workers. All
right. Thank you. So this does outline the elements, as you have mentioned, the roles and responsibilities. So we're moving towards the whole process piece as well to get towards Trustee Crawford's question as well. So is there any questions or suggestions for changes on roles and responsibilities? Understanding that this is, workplace policy. Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Director Marsh.
Chair Barrett, one of the things that we had started to do in our policies and then we moved away from it was the trustees' responsibilities. And I think that was based on previous feedback that we got from the Board of Trustees. So that's why when we're doing it, it's actually about the application of it into procedure. So hope that satisfied the feedback we had received previously. That was our general impression based on feedback on other policies.
Well, I think that certainly the last, if I could just add the commentary on the last discussion that we had, I know there was a desire to make sure that the trustees' role was clarified, but it was a broad-based board level discussion. This one is policy, and although policies under the Education Act, of course, still are the purview of trustees, there are certain roles and responsibilities that are not necessarily included in that element of responsibility and accountability. This is a workplace, to your point, it's a workplace policy, and therefore trustees will not necessarily have the element of input, control, or administration of such policies. So
I think you have full control of the policy, but that doesn't need to be said in terms of I think there was awkwardness when we started to try to define roles and responsibilities.
Right.
And so I think that's why we thought it's a given. The policies are the Board of Trustees are directing me, the Director of Education, through policy, and then we create that procedure. But just wanted to explain why we had taken that portion out previously.
Yeah, because to your point, and I was actually reinforcing the point, was that that policy is purview, but it doesn't have to be spelled out in every single policy. That it's under the umbrella of the role of trustees. Hence why it's at the committee meeting tonight. So, okay, perfect.
I think if I could just elaborate on that a little bit, Chair Barrett, too. You'll see in the old section too, it sort of had board responsibilities as being providing all employees with information, for example, right? And now we've moved that where the board is delegating the director to make sure that happens, which I think draws the appropriate balance between policy and implementation.
Yes. I mean, I was satisfied with it, but that's only voice of one. So, any further commentary, questions with regards to this section? Not seeing any, Superintendent Mundy, so I'll go back to you again.
So we have two final sections, 5, which is confidentiality, which just clarifies the importance of maintaining, this information is confidential unless otherwise required for safety of our workers and or otherwise by law. And then the training, that there will be a requirement to ensure that all workers are aware of the policy and that we provide regular training.
Right. Thank you for that. Hello, Nikki. Just acknowledging your arrival. Thank you. Just let you know we're on page 18, Nikki, of the first respectful workplace and harassment prevention policy. Yes. Trustee Martin.
I'm looking at 6, training. I'm curious to know, how does that training take place?
Thank you, and through your chair. So we will be working, one is to ensure that the policy is provided regularly, annually to all employees. But on top of that, there will be differentiated training, obviously training for managers and supervisors, and training for all employees to be aware of their rights, the expectations in the workplace, and how they can bring forward any concerns or complaints which is outlined more in the procedure, as the policy is the overview document.
Would that happen on a PD day?
Certainly, we know we have some health and, some typical 2 PA days or 3 usually before the school starts. So I think we would hope to embed that, especially as it initially comes out. But other training would likely occur for certain groups to ensure that they have that, like for our supervisors and managers, prior to rolling it out to the whole system on PA days. But we also have a number of employees that may not participate in the same PA day activities. So we need to ensure that it's reaching all our employee groups and the different hours that they work, and that we ensure that everyone has the same information.
Great idea. Thank you, Superintendent Mundy.
Thank you. Any further questions on confidentiality and training at this point? So, okay, not seeing any. We are going to move on to the complaints procedure. And I think that this might come back to some of the, these are the sections, Trustee Crawford, with regards to how the policy is enacted and how a complaint is brought forward. So I'll leave it to you again, Superintendent Mundy.
And what's been provided here would be this is the clean version, right? So you have the updated version of the procedure. So in the first section, it outlines the objectives, and then, for the procedure, which aligns obviously with the policy. So I don't know if there's any questions about any language in 1.0.
Trustees, any questions? Not seeing any, Heather.
Okay. 2, I think it's pretty obvious. It just connects us back to the definitions that are outlined in the policy. So I think getting into 3 is where we start to look at actually, reporting a complaint. So we've outlined, the process here for a worker in terms of who to contact and keeping written records. And then also noting that, we do encourage people to be able to address it with the respondent, but recognizing that may not always be appropriate or a safe request. So that isn't a requirement of reporting, and it's dependent on the situation. So 3.0 outlines the basic reporting complaint process. So if there's any questions through that.
If I could jump in, Chair Barrett, quickly, just wanted to confirm that we have a single complaint procedure now for both the breach of the safe and respectful, or alleged breach of the safe and respectful workplace, and the human rights policy. So this is the single procedure that you could go to, and you wouldn't have to worry about whether it's a human rights violation or a safe and respectful workplace violation, which now includes harassment, sexual harassment, and disrespectful conduct. So the intent here is to deal with in a pretty wholesome fashion with a single complaint process, so that it make it easier for employees to be able to access.
Right. So recognizing that with the 2 policies, that when we're reviewing this procedure, we're also reviewing it in its totality as well. So, okay. Any questions with regards to Section 3, trustees? Okay, not seeing any, Heather. I'll turn it to you for the process, Section 4.
Yeah, so Section 4, once again, outlines just the actual process. So we haven't created the complaint form yet, so it indicates it'll be in the attachment, which will be created as we roll out the policy and procedure. It just provides the appropriate timelines in terms of, sharing a complaint, recognizing that there is some discretion, dependent on that for the, within the 6 months.
Trustee Lundquist, I think I saw your hand. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I literally walked in the door and I'm late, so I'm struggling to make everything work.
No problem.
I guess my question is, why 6 months? Why was 6 months chosen as the period of time? Because that is not the standard, and I'm puzzled by that.
I think in terms of, it's similar to our previous policy and like our previous procedure. So we kind of aligned it with that in terms of what has been past practice.
Okay, so I'm just going to observe the following. And so I recognize that if it's something that is relatively minor, and I'm not saying that disrespectful behavior doesn't feel minor, regardless of whether it rises to a code violation or not. But for really serious sorts of issues, it sometimes takes longer to grapple with it in in a complainant's mind, and to come to terms with the ability to report and self-report. And so I would think that we would want to have the same kind of period for that we would find in regular sorts of pieces of legislation like human rights codes. So the 1 year. And if there's some educational rationale for 6 months, I understand. But if that's not the case, then my view is that a year is actually more appropriate. It aligns with human rights legislation, and I don't know that we would want to go below that floor.
I think it's fair to say, through you, Chair Barrett, I think it's fair to say, Trustee Lundquist, that we were sort of back and forth on this one a little bit, and it is a draft procedure, and we welcome obviously the feedback from the committee. This is obviously one area where it's a substantive point and it's a good point for discussion. And, we don't disagree that 12 months would also be reasonable. We tried to include language in 4.2 that would give the superintendent of human resources that discretion. But even at a year, we could have that same discretion as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that, and I recognize that it's a policy, or not a policy, it's a procedure, and I don't have an ability to require any changes. I just think it's important that we acknowledge, in the big scheme of things, I don't think we should be limiting people's rights in ways that they wouldn't have limitations in other forums. That's all. So I appreciate that you have heard me on that, and I will stop talking immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Edwards.
And I definitely concur with some of the comments that Trustee Lundquist said, but I also think that it's interesting because recently being involved with one where municipality is only 3 months. So, which is interesting for their complaint process. It was only 3 months you had. And I'm not saying to go shorter, but I also kind of recognize that, when you're looking at a school year and the majority of our staff is working from like up to 10 months, I would say that we'd somewhat want to get something out in the open, a complaint process at least started before the school year starts, sort of thing. So, recognizing maybe 6, but I know that the legislation says 12, but I'm thinking maybe 10 months because, we really do want to get the things out in the open so that people can deal with them. And leaving them for a whole year, no matter how small, it can add to the situation and the workplace. So, it's up to staff, honestly, what they think that is appropriate there. And I would just say you might want to look at it a little bit longer. And then the question I have also is, although would these complaint forms be available online, or is it just written?
Yes, and through you, Chair, we will provide them in accessible formats and actually support people if there's any need in completion as well. So it will be an online form, but also one that can be permitted and printed and submitted in a variety of ways.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Edwards. Trustee Crawford.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is probably speaking to some of the concerns that I had, but just to clarify it, it's when an incident occurs, it's good to get on it as quickly as possible. And when we say, if safe, do so, people could say, well, I didn't feel safe, and so I didn't approach the person. Is the next step to approach the immediate supervisor? I think that's what it says.
Sorry, through your chair. Yes, that would be the direction to approach your supervisor. Correct.
Okay, I'm concerned about people jumping ahead in the procedure and going somewhere else when, of course, the solution might be right close to the people, so the immediate supervisor, and of course they can go on from there. But where would they go from the supervisor if they weren't satisfied with the way it was being handled? To a superintendent? So
I think Trustee Crawford, that's actually the starts it in just the next section. You're one section too early because it talks about an informal or mediated resolution. So I think that would potentially address that. So
all right, that's heading in the right direction. And
well, yeah, we're getting there, Trustee. We're getting
no, there. No, I mean, I mean the policy is heading in the right direction. And as to the amount of time, I think that should always be flexible. You could set a time, but make sure that when you look at it, that you'll be able to add more time to it. In other words, don't make it so that, sorry, you're a few days late, nothing can be done. I hope that the wording is built in there so that it could go longer than 3 or 6 or even 1 year. That's just a thought, so I'll leave that. Maybe it'll show up later.
Well, actually, Trustee Crawford, it's actually in the language already proposed under 4.2. It says that however, at the good faith discretion of the superintendent for human resources, a complainant outside this time frame may be considered. So it has built some flexibility into that as well in the policy as well.
Okay, that sounds good. And as to a complaint form, sometimes that scares people away. So I hope it's not compulsory for it to be a complaint form. Maybe just the details be given. And thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Back to you, Trustee Lundquist.
I'm sorry, I saw that Trustee Forbes had her hand up. I don't know if she still does.
No, she took it down. So.
Okay, sorry, I just didn't want to overstep.
I'm keeping track.
Sorry, it's hard sometimes, so I just wanted to make sure. So I don't want to belabor the point of the 1 year, but I'm just going to make the following observation. Law is a minimum standard for a reason, right? It's not what you strive for. It's the bare minimum. It's the floor. It's what you have to do. And so I recognize that there will be times where people will have options to go through a different process if they so choose, potentially, particularly non-union employees or even union employees. So it just seems to me that I heard what Trustee Edwards said, but I have to say, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me because this could happen in May. It could happen in June. And if it's something very serious, it may not be before the next school year that it gets addressed anyway. So I don't think the 1 year actually necessarily impacts that because you don't know when these kinds of issues are going to arise over the course of a year. But really, I know this is not my decision, but I can't stress this enough. I have a ton of experience with these kinds of issues. And I do this every day and I see significant delay and you get significant delay when it's a pattern of behavior that builds or when it's a very serious incident that it takes somebody time to process. And I don't want to exclude somebody from a process that may give them a remedy that they desperately need to recognize their dignity or their value or, to make working life bearable, frankly. And so, although I understand that there is discretion to put in place your own parameters in a policy, This is not a small thing. It is actually one of the things that has been complained about in municipal codes of conduct, where they held themselves to a lower standard than what is required in basic legislation for everybody else. So I would really be unhappy if we went down a road where we held ourselves to a lower standard. I think our workers deserve that. I think complainants deserve it. I think that it is what is fair. And I do want to actually agree with Trustee Crawford on one final point, which is the form itself. I think that as long as it provides an adequate basis for which an inquiry can be made, that should be enough. This idea that if it's not on this form, you don't proceed, that actually ends up with a lot of trouble for people unnecessarily. So as long as it discloses on its face what is required or that can be followed up, I think that that is adequate. And I hope that we provide flexibility in that regard.
Thank you. I think staff has indicated that they were going to potentially move to a 12-month as well. So I think that certainly is a direction, and there is the feedback on the form and the accessibility to be able to do that. So take that into consideration when designing that form. Any questions further about 4? So we are moving to section 5, which is the informal or mediated resolution, which I think is where Trustee Crawford has been looking towards an opportunity to resolve prior for it to go to the next step. So I'll turn it over to you, Superintendent Mundy.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So at any point through the process, the complaint process, we can certainly look to a resolution, because ultimately that's the goal of the policy where possible, and that they can engage in that, and we can support it through multiple ways in terms of the mediation. And if that occurs, then that will be we'll create a document in terms of outlining the terms so that it's very clear what was the outcome.
Okay, so to add to that, Superintendent Mundy, Trustee Crawford, there are elements within this, as you can see, that talks about the ability to be able to have mediation, be able to resolve it, and with the consent of parties, be able to act as a mediator. Even superintendent responsible for human resources can act as a mediator. There's lots of opportunity in there to be able to resolve it prior to being able to go further in the process, as you outlined, Superintendent Mundy. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the vast majority of situations are resolved with the immediate supervisor between the employees. So it's only when it's a more serious situation that it tends to get escalated.
Does that answer some of those earlier questions, Trustee Crawford?
Sorry, Chair, I had to go out of one form and come into another to be able to speak. Yeah, it does, and I'm reading through it as we go, and it does seem that way. And as the director pointed out, most of these will be resolved as soon as you can get the people together and a supervisor and point out it's inappropriate, and some will go on. My next question is about the ones that go on. They have to be cut off at some point, and I don't know if that's mentioned here, that eventually a supervisor has to say this has gone as far as it can, or is it that one party can carry it on indefinitely? Is there a cutoff point, or would we allow it to go on indefinitely?
I think that Trustee Crawford, you're my greatest straight man here tonight, because that's actually section 6, which is the next section we're going to be able to deal with. So with that lead in, you remind me of being on the Jack Benny show with you, Paul Crawford. So we'll turn over to you, section 6, Heather Mundy.
Who's Jack Benny?
Who's Jack Benny? Sure. Oh, go ahead, Heather.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So as Trustee Crawford was mentioning, that at a certain point, mediation isn't always a solution. And so, and dependent on that, and then dependent on decision of either the complainant or the respondent to participate in that, we would move into an investigation process. And so it outlines through the investigation progress sort of some timelines related to that, and also in terms of how the investigator will work through the specific process itself. What results will be provided in terms of written notice and sharing that information appropriately with both the complainant and the respondent. Noting that results is not the same as an investigation report, but it does provide clear information to both parties who've been involved in the process. So I don't know if there's any questions for that section, which goes into more detail related to the investigation.
Yeah, just to maybe just add to that, Superintendent Mundy, just in the sense that under 6.2, there's a commitment to try and work towards the best efforts to be able to complete the investigation within 90 days. So that might address some of Trustee Crawford's concerns about it, quote unquote, an end, or at least there's the beginning of the end, or at least a commitment to try and to work towards a resolution within that time frame as well. So just pointing that out in direct relationship to that question. Trustee Morton.
I'm looking at 6.3 and I'm curious to know the meaning of this statement. The investigator must not be the respondent and must not be a direct report of the respondent. What does that mean?
So through you, Chair. So because sometimes the investigators are actually within my department, so they're part of people and culture, so there are employees. So we, obviously, if I was a respondent, I wouldn't be investigating my own situation. And if I was the respondent, I wouldn't want someone who reports to me to be doing the investigation. So it's a matter of ensuring that we keep it free from bias and ensure that it's a proper investigation.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. Are there any other further questions, comments about Section 6? Process? Not seeing any, Superintendent Mundy, so we'll move to Section 7, disciplinary actions.
Thank you. So this outlines, some potential disciplinary actions, making it clear and that the supervisor would be involved in that process, and that obviously we understand that the outcome of any discipline is to change behavior. And so the focus of any corrective action could be from coaching, warning, etc., in terms of ensuring that we see that changed behavior.
Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. So my question about this is, I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree entirely that the goal of anti-harassment policy is to stop and change behavior, always. But there are times where incidents are so serious that will not be adequate, that somebody will need to have a more profound disciplinary consequence meted out. And I just want to flag that as something that might need to be specified in a pretty clear way in order to meet the requirements of policy, reasonableness of policy in terms of the KVP test. So, I understand my job here isn't as a lawyer, it's as a trustee, but I also recognize that if we don't put those kinds of things in the policy in a very clear way, then it's going to be more difficult, and then it will become a problem for trustees. So I'm just noting that now because there's still time to get it more clearly placed.
And through you, Chair, in 7.2, we do outline that progressive discipline and that it's proportional, right, to the situation that could result in anything up to and including termination. So I think it does outline that there could be significant discipline there. And these, once again, are not limited, same thing, could include, but not limited to.
Yeah, and I think that will do it. I just think sometimes it's better to have I'm going to just send something in if that's okay, in terms of language, if that's acceptable. Not to say that it needs to be included, but just as an example, because I've come across this problem very recently and it might be useful.
We're happy to take that under advisement. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford.
No, that was one of the concerns I had too, because a very serious thing, we still have to have the ability to react to them immediately. Like if it was something that somebody broke the law, we wouldn't want people to think that they can do something serious and then go through a lengthy process before something would happen. But it seems that that's understood. And my next favorite one, of course, is cost. It sounds like this is going to be all internal, so there won't be any additional costs to this. It's going to be done by our people internally. I believe that's correct.
Through you, Chair, I'll start, and then certainly Superintendent Mundy, you can jump in.
I think Heather, we'll let the director start. Heather, it's okay. So go ahead, Director Myers.
Thank you. So the answer is not necessarily. It depends on the situation and the complexity of the situation and who's being accused of the behavior. So the intent, for the most part, is to have investigators internally conduct the investigation and have an outcome. As I said, most situations are actually resolved at the supervisor level. So in these instances, it would depend on the complexity, and in the long run, it is less expensive to make sure you have the appropriate investigator in terms of fair process and perception of fair process. So it would really depend on the context.
And is that built into the policy as well? I mean, maybe I'm ahead of it again, but so is somewhere in the policy, does it say that outside investigators could be used or outside sources?
We don't have it in the policy because we view it as operational. But what we do reference is that, for example, if it's the superintendent of HR or it's the general counsel, those are sorts of good examples of internal, external investigators, or potentially any member of the senior staff, because of that perception of fair process. That would be depending on the nature of the complaint as well, right? If it was of a significance.
So it would be a rare situation then, just as you said, most of these are going to be settled at a lower level and quickly. So it'd be a rare situation to bring in outside investigation or add additional cost.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, through you, Chair Barrett, just for Trustee Crawford's benefit, the relevant provision as to internal versus external is Section 4.6 of the procedure.
You don't want me to go backwards, do you?
No, Trustee Crawford. Oh. Well, I guess just as a comment from myself, just in the sense that if there is a situation that warrants it, the necessity of spending dollars to ensure impartiality is something that has to be done, because the last thing we need is to be able to have an investigation that is tainted because it is not seen as impartial. So sometimes, in my experience, I don't have as much experience as Nikki, but I've involved for 30 years in human resources. Sometimes you have to spend the dollars in order to be able to make sure that there is equity and equality and fairness, and certainly an element of making sure that everyone has the opportunity to be able to be heard in an impartial fashion. So, Trustee Lundquist?
Yeah, I appreciate all of that, and I agree entirely. And I just wonder, is there some kind of, and this is really for my own edification, I guess, is there some kind of checklist, some kind of decision-making tree, something that indicates when you would go outside versus inside? Because like sometimes, in my experience, at least, people try to keep things in-house because it's less expensive, but they don't necessarily have the expertise to deal with certain kinds of issues, not just who the respondent is, but some of the complexities of like a sexual assault, for example. So like very serious kinds of matters. And the reason I'm asking this is because I feel like it's one of those tragic mistakes that end up costing a lot more money in the end if you don't have the right person with the right level of understanding and expertise doing the investigation. So I'm just wondering if we have thought about a process for like what triggers the external investigation versus just who's involved, but the sort of nature of it that includes all the sort of complexities of a complaint.
Go to Council Cotter. Go ahead, Council Cotter.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. So yes, the typical process is that Superintendent Mundy and I will usually have that discussion before the investigators appointed, and you've hit the factors that we discussed. So the first one would be any potential for bias or reasonable apprehension of bias. Second factor would obviously be complexity, and a third factor would sort of be, what does the case sort of call out for? Which deals both with seriousness, complexity, who the complainant is, who the respondent is. So we sort of work through each of those factors and make the decision. And I think, we've been, once we get into that discussion, once we sort of lean towards, we think this should be external, then that's usually the default, right? Because once we're raising those concerns, then those concerns are raised.
Just to clarify, Trustee Lundquist, I don't think you're asking for that to be included in this procedure, but you're asking whether or not there is perhaps a matrix internally that allows them a process to be able to make those decisions. Is that correct?
Exactly. So I don't think it belongs in the document, but I do think it's one of, I'm just floating it out there because it seems like an opportune time to say it may not always be Superintendent Mundy in that role. It may not always be Patrick Cotter in that role. And it would be good to have some kind of document that expresses how that decision making is going to happen.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Section 8.
Yes, so Section 8 kind of speaks to sort of the next step in terms of the completion of an investigation, and if either the complainant or the respondent feel there's a need for a review, but it does outline the grounds for a review, because we often know one individual may not be satisfied with the outcome, but that doesn't mean that we redo the investigation. It more speaks to the criteria, right, of there being a misuse or a non-compliance with the procedure itself, or whether there's new evidence or something that's come forward that will add information to potentially change the outcome of the investigation.
Thank you. Any questions on Section 8 or comments? Not seeing any. Misuse of complaint procedures, Section 9.
So as with anything, we want to ensure that people do things in good faith. So this just outlines that that's the expectation around the use of the procedure, policy and procedure.
Okay. Not seeing any hands or questions, Superintendent Mundy. So we'll go to confidentiality and records, Section 10.
Yeah, so this just outlines our how we will manage, the confidentiality of these investigations and the records. So I don't know if there's any questions, concerns related to that.
Yeah. Noting the 5 years at the end of it. So, yeah. Not seeing any questions on that either, Superintendent Mundy. So that would conclude our review of the appendix. Okay. I don't see any further questions. We did have a couple of small changes, but I think that with this policy, the draft Safe and Respectful Workplace and Harassment Prevention Policy, I believe that certainly what staff is looking for is being able to have a recommendation that this go to board. I know that there's been a couple of changes, the 12 months noted. There was some discussion with regards to being able to further define the quote unquote gossip found in the earlier section, to be able to define that. I do not, if I was keeping track, I do not remember any further substantive changes to the policy or recommendations. So I'm wondering if it's the will of the individuals here tonight, if they would like to be able to make a motion to be able to recommend the policy to be able to go forward for notice of motion to the board. I'm going to, Nikki, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, so I don't feel like I can make that motion because I wasn't here and I missed some of the discussion, frankly. And I just have a query about that because I may have a couple of observations I would like to make about peace, and I know it still has to go to board and I will have an opportunity to do that there. But I just want to confirm that I might wish to do that still because I don't want to hold it up. I'm happy to do it at board, and I would send in my observations ahead of time so that there was no question about it. But because I wasn't here and I recognize it's entirely my fault, I just want to confirm that I will have an opportunity to raise concerns if I still have them.
Well, certainly the process would work that it would come to board as a notice of motion. Then there would still be an opportunity for you to be able to make suggested changes, not dissimilar to the methodology that we used before, reviewing it section by section and then being able to make any amendments as you may or may not suggest.
Right, thank you. That helps considerably.
Okay. I'm going to go to trustee. Oops, I see Nora first, and if directly related to this, Director Marsh.
It is. Thank you, Chair Barrett. So just to clarify, when it goes forward for notice of motion, if it's possible, and I understand if it's not, for us to get feedback when it is going for notice of motion, because it gives us an opportunity potentially then to make a change before it goes back. But is that not possible? Because I understand it's notice of motion on the documents we present, but if we don't get the feedback until the following meeting, we've sort of sat stagnant for a month. So I was just wondering, is it possible to seek feedback with the notice of motion and have track changes that go to the board should there be the necessity? Or is that it's a process question? We'll go either way. We're happy either way, but just wondering.
Well, I think that certainly with the notice of motion, because it is a notice of motion, that any proposed changes can be distributed prior to the board meeting that it would be considered. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use you as my example, Trustee Lundquist, if I could. So if the notice of motion comes forward, Trustee Lundquist has elements within that policy that she would like changed. She could certainly submit them and they could be presented that night. So a track change document could be part of the proposed changes that would be put on the docket that night. They would come forward as amendments. But that does not preclude the policy from being approved that night with the amendments as potentially proposed.
Okay, thank you very much.
But wouldn't necessarily hold it up. Because even that night, if Trustee Lundquist was just presenting them that night, again, using you as my example, Trustee Lundquist, they could still be amendments made that night and passed as long as obviously everybody understood the ramifications of the changes. I understand that it would be nice to be able to have that in advance, and also it would also give staff the courtesy of being able to understand what those changes would be, for example, and react to them, for example. So,
thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to you, Patrick Cotter, first, just if it's in relationship to what I was blethering on about. So.
Yes, and through you, Chair Barrett. So I think the intent of our bylaws on this, though, is that it's not debated the first night. Because want trustees to have the benefit of the month to digest and review.
Yes, there is no debate on the notice of motion, but that doesn't preclude from somebody being able to potentially submit amendments in advance to be considered and then could be part of the next board package, for example. So we would have the opportunity for consideration. So, okay.
I'm sorry, Chair Barrett.
Yes, go ahead. Yes. Since I've used your name in vain, yes, you can go next.
I'm entirely comfortable, and you won't be the first or the last, I'm sure. So I just want to clarify that this is fine then. So if I review it again after this evening, the notice comes out or before, when we reviewed the human rights policy, we were given an opportunity to send our concerns in writing. So can we adopt a similar process? Would that be appropriate in the context of this?
It'd be appropriate, but I think it's certainly up to the board, but I think that with that process, we had another meeting, so it would, we'd have to have another meeting of the committee. I'm not against that by any stretch, but from that process, that's
I'm not trying to do that. I'm not
but also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm not trying to extend the process. I'm not trying to complicate it. I'm actually trying to not to do the opposite, but I fear that is not what is happening. So I'm going to stop talking, and I will, if I see changes that I think are vital or, consequential at the very least, then I will advise immediately, and then whatever is done with that, you as chair and the chair of the board can figure that out. Thanks.
Okay, like for example, you had suggested that you were going to send some language or clarification in that could potentially be considered by staff to be included. Perhaps we can look at suggesting that we pass the policy in principle, and then in that regards, if staff has determined that they want to be able to make those potential revisions, that therefore that could be tracked in the draft that comes to the board, so that trustees would be able to zero in on those potential changes that were made, as long as it does not, for example, alter, and I'm sure it would not, alter the intent of the document itself. So I'm going to go back to you, Director Marsh, and if it's related to this, because I have a feeling it might be. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair Barrett. I was going to say very similar to you. I think one of the reasons why we moved to written feedback previously was also because we were sharing the procedures, and most of the feedback was actually related to the procedures. And so staff have control over that and aren't requiring the board to agree on the content. And so I would be uncomfortable with setting that standard of written feedback on policy for that reason.
Okay. But we can still, to that point, be able to potentially suggest changes, and then can be potentially amended within the process. Yes.
Yeah, just it's not staff's decision at that point.
Correct. Yes. I'm going to go back to you, and thank you for your patience, Trustee Morton, because I was like a little billiard ball kind of bouncing around here, but we're back on process, and I'm going to go to you next.
Thank you kindly. I want to say that this document represents many, many hours of our staff working on this. They've done a great job, and I definitely would put forward the motion that we're going to take this to board as a notice of motion.
So to adopt in principle the draft.
Correct.
Safe and respectful workplace and harassment prevention policy, to go forward as a notice of motion to the next board meeting, and someone can figure out what date that is. I barely know what today is. So
thank you for putting the words in my mouth, but you said it exactly.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second to that motion? Paul, I know your hand is up. I didn't know if it, I realized it was up before the motion was on the floor. I didn't know if it was a hand to move the motion. If not, I will get a seconder, and then I'll come back to you if that's the case.
Well, I don't mind seconding the motion. My concerns came up about process. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is that standing committee is not a requirement on this particular one?
It wasn't going to standing. Oh, are you asking, is standing
No,
committee step? Is that what you mean? Sorry.
No, I'm saying that ordinarily it goes from here to standing, but I know it's not in every case, and we might argue here that this was something, I think it was initiated by staff, correct? This is not something that the board said, I want the committee to do this. When we did that before, we took it to standing for more debate. Then we moved it to board for notice of motion.
Right.
So, and it said in our previous bylaws that committees report to standing.
Yes. I see Patrick's got his hand up, so I'm just going to ask. I think he wants to weigh into this, and then we'll come back. Of course, Trustee Crawford. Go ahead, Council.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Barrett. Under our new bylaws, policy and governance reports directly to the board, and those are now in effect as of Monday.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I just wanted clarification on it. The other thing is, no matter, even if we, like I did before, I put out some notice as to amendments that I was interested in, and that might give staff a heads up. But it still has to go through the process of the amendment being stated and seconded and debated at the next board meeting. And we don't want to get too far in advance, so that we want to move something quickly that maybe there'll be amendments that would cause it to be delayed or postponed for a while. But I'm big on process, so no matter how much information we give you, we still have to go through the process of an amendment and et cetera, and debate.
Yeah, that's the process. That's right. That's absolutely correct. That's the process that I outlined, Trustee Crawford, that even if it comes forward as a notice of motion, then any suggested changes have to be brought forward in formal amendments, because we'll have had the document before us. So you are absolutely correct. So we are in violent agreement. Yes, it is, because it still needs to. And to your point, Trustee Crawford, if there's considerable debate and, for argument's sake, hesitation, it still remains the prerogative of the board to be able to delay the passage, dependent upon our comfort level and acceptance. So you are correct in that one as well. So, so I do have a motion on the floor. Further debate or questions to that motion, which is to adopt in principle the draft safe and respectful workplace and harassment prevention policy to be moved forward as a notice of motion to the next board meeting.
I'll second it, and then I'm going to announce that I have to leave in about 10 minutes for another meeting.
Okay, I don't want to lose quorum, but
I won't. I'll stick if it's quorum is a problem, but I do have to go to.
I think if you leave,
meeting. We're okay, aren't we?
For now, I know that Trustee Forbes has indicated she's got to leave at 7:30 for another meeting, and then if you leave after that, Trustee Crawford, I lose quorum. So
we're that close.
Yes, we are that close, my son. So let's keep pushing on then. So I do have a motion on the table. Any further debate to the motion? As I read, is there anybody opposed to the motion? I see no one in opposition, so we will move this forward as a notice of motion to the next board meeting. I would like to, cognizant of quorum, be able to move to the draft human rights, anti-discrimination, anti-racism policy starting on page 28. But I'm going to go to just trying to find out the track changes document. Sorry, as I flip through the pages.
52.
Thank you so much. Since I didn't get dinner last night, Director Marsh, I'm just faint with hunger here. So, so it is on page 52. Thank you so much. The track changes. And looking for you, Director Marsh. Is it? No, it's probably Devika because you've turned on your camera. Is that maybe correct? Okay. If you want to take us through that, that's terrific. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, and good evening, trustees. So bringing back the revised human rights policy based on one main area of change that we'll go through in a second. But as we were going through the updated version, on page 55 and 57, you'll see a couple of minor track changes, which were really just some cleanups, expanding out a acronym that hadn't been fully defined, and a couple of other minor changes just to streamline content. And on 57, really to align with the new title of the complaints procedure that you just saw. So if there are no concerns there, then I can move to the more substantive edits that start on page 58, which were around the issues around responsibilities that we talked about last time.
Okay, so let's just touch base on the couple of changes that you've indicated there on 55 and 57. Is there any questions or concerns about the changes as outlined? Okay, I don't see any, so now we can move on to the substantive changes. Thank you. You're on mute. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. So starting on page 58 and over to page 60 are the substantive edits to the section around responsibility based on the discussion and the feedback from trustees at our last meeting. So there's some track changes showing just to make it clear that what the responsibilities of everyone are for ensuring that they're engaging in behavior that is aligning with the policy and that does not violate this policy. And then goes into the duty bearer responsibilities that we spoke about earlier, and what the role of the director is, and then what the roles and responsibilities of the trustees are. And in making those cleanup changes, there were, we moved one line from page 61 over into this section because it spoke to responsibilities and accountabilities. So I know that was a lot and it looks jarring when you look at the edits on this page, but hopefully that makes sense in terms of the discussion at our last meeting, in terms of strengthening responsibilities for everybody, and delineating the role of the director and ensuring that the procedures set out the responsibilities of staff, and as well the responsibilities of the Board of Trustees.
Okay, thank you. Comments or questions with regards to the changes that were made on this section? I know this is in response to feedback. I'm not seeing any.
Sorry, Trustee Barrett or Chair Barrett.
Oh, sorry, I missed you, Darlene. Sorry.
It's my fault. I used this hand and
okay, all right.
The other hand. I just, from my understanding, because it is a little jarring with the track changes, so I just want to be sure that when I'm looking at page, I guess this is page 58 at the top of the folio, or I don't know how the number works. But so when I'm reading the responsibilities and accountability, and I see 3.16, and then I see the addition in the red track changes, and then I see A. So the treat other DDSB community members with dignity and respect and not violate the policy. And then the next entrance that we have for that section 3.16 is, and the code of conduct for students. I just want to make sure that I'm reading that correctly. Okay. And then I'm just, I guess as we go into duty bearer responsibilities, is that under 3.16 as well, or is that a new section? Because 3.18 is struck. Would it be? Sorry.
It is a new section with with the subheading of duty bearer responsibilities. And yes, you're right. The numbers are hard to read in the track changes version. In the clean version, it reads a little clearer.
Okay. So this is what was initially under 3.18 is basically but still below the section of duty bearer responsibilities, but then we have the detail in 3.17 below it. I just want to make sure I'm following along.
Yes, I think that's right. I'm just going back to the clean version as well, just to make sure that is what you're seeing. So if it helps, on page 38 is the clean version. Sorry if folks need to flip back and forth, but just because it is a little easier to read there. In terms of 3.16, then the duty bearer responsibilities as a subheading with the duty bearer responsibilities listed under there.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Is that good, Trustee Forbes?
Yes, I'm sorry. That makes sense to me now.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Yeah, it is easier to read in the clean version. Trustee Crawford, just so you know, I'm not a very good accountant. Even when Trustee Forbes has to leave, you can leave. I see you just put a chat in the message in the chat. I did miscount, so I appreciate you coming in, but we still have quorum if both you and Darlene leave, as long as Trustee Lundquist stays. So.
Thanks for that. Did you forget to count yourself, Mr. Chair?
I did. I usually do that. So, okay. Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Okay. Sorry about that.
So again, then if that section works, then on page 61, the edit that you see there is a deletion of a line from page 61 because it is now incorporated in the new responsibilities and accountability section. So it would have been a duplication. So if that works, the only other changes to the policy itself are, again, just some cleanup in the reference document section. And I'll stop there for a second in case there are any comments.
Yep. Any comments on the changes and cleanup that was discussed? Yes, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. I feel like I am taking up a lot of space, and I apologize for that because it's not my intention. I just want to say that from the document that we were first given to this, it's far clearer. It's far better. I'm still struggling with a couple of pieces of it, but they're minor things. And I just want to say I really appreciate that the questions that we had and the concerns that we posed were addressed by Human Rights Advisor Mather, and that I want to say this, I think, Chair Barrett, this is hard, right? It is hard to create a policy that is usable, that is functional, that is going to be seen as something that can vindicate rights, but also that is something that is supportive of people's dignity in their work and learning environment. And I think this does that. So even with some, what I would call our small imperfections that I think are there still, I just want to say that this has become from something that was, I think, a difficult policy to digest to something that is much more user-friendly, much more readable, and frankly, something that actually has the potential to be used by people in a positive way. So I really wanted to say thank you, because I recognize that human rights work is emotional work. And it is emotional work whether you're drafting a policy or whether you're engaged in investigations or whether you are somebody who needs the protection of a policy. It's emotional. It's emotional. And so it's hard to be critical of a policy when you know that that is the case, because it's emotional labor. It's not just intellectual labor. And I see all of that in there. So I'm saying that because I really want to recognize how difficult it is to ask people to move on these kinds of things. And we've done it repeatedly, and people continue to do it. And it is exactly as it should be. regardless of how hard that work is. So thank you for all of it. And I just really want to say it's appreciated, deeply and genuinely appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lundquist for expressing those sentiments, and the rest of the people say hear, hear. So you were going to go on, however, to just the last changes, I think. So, which is I think on 71, if I'm not mistaken. So I could be wrong. I'll follow your lead.
Thank you. And just before I do, thank you, Trustee Lundquist. And also I wanted to acknowledge Patrick Cotter, because he did a lot of work in terms of helping with the revisions and getting us to the place that we are now. So thank you to Patrick as well. And in terms of the glossary, so page 66, just again, a bit of cleanup to align with what's in the policy. 68, just to make it clear that we're not, that the definition of hate crime aligns with the criminal code. And some cleanup in 71 as well in terms of the definition of undue hardship. And I think that's it, unless I've missed anything.
No, I think that was it. I'm the one who missed a couple of them, so you were able to catch those. Any questions, trustees, with regards to the couple of changes made in the final section? If not, similar process to our earlier policy, I'm going to suggest that if the will of the committee to be able to move this policy in principle as a notice of motion to the next Board of Trustees meeting. So I'm just wondering if someone would like to be able to move a motion that the Governance and Policy Committee recommend the acceptance of the draft human rights, anti-discrimination, and anti-racism policy in principle, and that the policy move forward as a notice of motion to the next board meeting. I'm not sure who had their hand up first because I was down reading. I don't know what that. Are you pointing? Was you, Trustee Lundquist? Donna? Okay, all right, thank you. Donna, you're moving that?
Yes, I will.
Thank you so much. And I assume Trustee Lundquist is seconder?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Further discussion to this motion on the table? Not seeing any. I'll ask any of those who are opposed to the policy, please, the motion, please indicate by letting me know in opposition. Any of those in opposition to the motion? I'm not seeing any, so we'll consider that the motion is approved, and this policy will move as a draft notice of motion. And to the larger philosophical discussion we had with regards to the process of the policy, I won't go over it, but it would follow a similar policy process that if there comes towards a notice of motion, and if there is a desire to be able to potentially make further changes, that they could come forward as recommendations and then could be perhaps brought forward as amendments to the policy as it comes forward to the next board meeting after the next board meeting. So seeing that as the case, looking for my agenda, there is no other business. And since the meeting of this committee has been completed, I therefore declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, trustees and staff. And again, I can't say it much more eloquently than Trustee Lundquist has already indicated and already spoken to, but certainly a great deal of thank you and respect and gratitude for being able to move this. And I think that the one line that I certainly caught, I mean, I love writing policy. I write a lot of policies in my life, but I do not like to write the human rights policy because, as you said, Trustee Lundquist, it is a very emotional piece, and that's certainly the words I took away. And I appreciate the persistence and the commitment of everyone who sits at the table in order to be able to bring this forward. So look forward to the discussion at the board meeting when it comes forward. So thank you, trustees. This meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you and good night.